Linwood closed in 1981. Ironically, the government-backed investment of £23 million squandered here was exactly what was needed in the Midlands for this revolutionary British design, Issigonis's Mini.
There's no gainsaying the quality and novelty of the Mini concept. It's one of the most significant cars ever and became a legend in its own lifetime. To save space, Issigonis turned the engine round sideways and actually hid the gearbox in the sump. And to make this already small car even more compact and manoeuvrable, he gave it tiny wheels and front-wheel drive. In fact, he designed this car from the inside out. And if the details were somewhat utilitarian, they at least contributed to its immense chic. But the thing was, this car was designed outside the British system, rather than as a natural expression of it. Throughout the 50s, the old British Motor Corporation bought extra production capacity by the duplication of existing lines, rather than by the more demanding creation of technologically new ones. Because it was done on the cheap, the company didn't realize the sorts of economies of scale which mass production should bring. Ford introduced the new Cortina in 1962. It was a simple and robust car because Ford engineers, in doing a design cost analysis on the Mini, they determined that it wasn't actually possible to make this car profitably. A simple fact it took BMC's accountants 18 years to realize. If you compare the manufacture of the Mini with the Volkswagen, you find a contrast of British patch-up and make-do with German rationalism. By convincing themselves they were saving money on development, but at the same time failing to invest in new production technology, BMC sowed the seeds of its own destruction. When Volkswagen came to replace its dying Beetle, they faced similar problems to Leyland with the Mini, but because of Volkswagen's new production technology, they were much better able to commission the best sort of design, that's to say, a radically new and innovative one. But the Metro, conceived as the successor of the Mini and heralded as the car to save British Leyland, was condemned to being very little more than a warmed-over version of the original concept, and the sales figures tell the rest of the story. It's a depressing footnote to the history of Britain's industrial decline that the car which Volkswagen chose to replace the Beetle, the Golf, was, in engineering terms, a direct descendant of this brilliant British achievement. And that's why this small car is so essentially tragic. I don't mean it as any criticism of Alec Issigonis's genius to call this car a design failure. In its long life, the Mini faced problems which exactly mirror the larger problems of British industry. Somebody once said that design is the business of managing change. And of course, this car suggested lots of change. But the innovations and the optimism of Issigonis's Mini, they were treated with, I think, contempt by BMC's managers and accountants. And investment, which requires some sort of sense of the future, presupposes that sort of vision. And therefore, is it really any surprise that there was no future for an industry which didn't invest?
BMC's was a workshop culture. Their engineering could be brilliant. The Mini, the first small car with a sideways engine and front drive, was ahead of its time.
70 and faster. 72, 3, 4, 75 miles an hour. Surprising the lives out of the motorists, they whipped past.
But though the Mini became one of the best-selling British cars, planning and marketing let it down.
I don't think anyone will deny that the Mini, particularly in the light of its great success, was undercosted. And at that time, what was it, under 500, would easily have stood another 100, which could have made an enormous difference, a 20% increase to the fortunes of Austin.
For 9 years, it was severely underpriced. And on my calculations, as a motor car, it made no money at all for the first 9 years.
BMC's chief engineer, Alec Issigonis, had conceived the Mini, and he went on to design the equally popular 1100. But profits stayed low. The 1100 was made in 4 different places. There was still a tangled network of factories. The BMC merger hadn't worked through. Austin and Morris still had separate dealer networks, and the two biggest factories, Cowley at Oxford and Longbridge in Birmingham, turned out ranges of cars that often competed with one another. They were sliding into trouble.
He'd been doing so.
I could hardly blow my nose without having authority to do so.
To match the competition, the Stokes team knew they really had to lose 30,000 jobs and close plants which duplicated one another. But they didn't feel they could follow that plan through.
It was not an age, you've got to remember, when you could shut factories. Particularly GEC had just had a tremendous industrial disturbance with the closing of the Woolwich factory. The unions were in a very strong negotiating position, and they made it absolutely clear to us, both publicly and privately, that if ever we tried to shut down anything, they would resist it to the very maximum.
Unable to close plants, they tried to make them work more effectively and took on the other great leftover from the Midlands past, piecework. They wanted to bring in a flat weekly wage, measured day work, and to get rid of the anarchic piecework system and the hold-ups that went with it.
If you wanted to change a cigarette lighter or something, you had to renegotiate piecework times for the whole car again. It became impossible. When you introduced a new model, it would be perhaps 6 or even 9 months before you could get the piecework rates agreed for every single item on the car. And therefore, measured day work was the obvious solution. We knew that it was being done with all our major competitors, and our problem was that we had to introduce it in a hurry.
Moving fast, they took the whole company over from piecework within 3 years. Foremen who'd grown up with the old incentive system found their job more